Thank you so much for all the support in the previous video. I was really surprised how it blew up, so let's keep it up. We have 8 different social media platforms for review based on your comment. First one on the list is Mastodon. That Mastodon is basically a collection of different servers, and each server has its own purpose, rules, and community. So instead of joining one huge platform where everyone is together, you choose a smaller community that fits your interests. For example, there is Mastodon Social, which is probably the one closest to a normal social media experience. Then you have things like Flipboard Social, which is more focused on communities of curators and enthusiasts. And then you have Metalhead Club, which is a Mastodon server hosted in Germany and powered by 100% green energy. There are literally thousands of servers you can choose from, and you can even filter them by region, which is really nice. Because as someone who has always struggled with different time zones, finding people who are online at the same time is quite important. I always feel like a lot of online spaces are very American focused, so sometimes it is nice to find communities closer to your own time zone. However, when I first looked at Mastodon, I was honestly a little bit overwhelmed. There are just so many options and you're sitting there thinking, okay, so which one am I supposed to join? And I think that this is probably the biggest problem for new users. The freedom is great, but it also creates a lot of confusion. At the same time, I think this structure works really well for artists because you can find much smaller and more niche communities. And I think that is something that a lot of bigger social media platforms are missing at the moment. The closest comparison I can think of is Discord. A lot of smaller communities also manually review new members, which I think helps keep them safer and avoids a lot of bot problems. There is also Mastodon Art, which is a more general art-focused server. Interestingly, it is not just shown in the normal list of servers, so you have to specifically search it. It is basically a place for different types of artists to share their work. One thing I liked is how they handle sensitive content. For mature topics or not safe for work artwork, users add content warnings like a trigger warning so other people can choose whether they want to see it or not. And I actually think this is a good system because it gives users more control. It is not about completely removing certain types of content, but allowing people to decide what they're comfortable seeing. So Mastodon Art also does not allow AI-generated art, which is something a lot of artists are looking for right now. However, there are some criticisms of the platform as well. While I was researching, I saw quite a few people mention issues with Mastodon Art specifically. Some users feel like the moderation can become too strict and that the community can feel a bit gatekeepy. There are multiple people who have mentioned being banned for things they felt were minor, and some users ended up moving to bigger servers like Mastodon Social because of it. Of course, moderation is always complicated, especially in smaller communities where a few people have a lot of control. I think the intention is good because they're trying to create a safe space, but sometimes it can feel like it goes too far. So for joining Mastodon Art, the process itself was actually quite easy. I applied at around 7 p.m. and I got access within a few hours. You basically create an account and explain why you want to join the community. So the process wasn't really difficult. Overall, I think Mastodon is a really interesting concept. It feels very different from traditional social media because it focuses more on smaller communities instead of one giant algorithm-driven platform. The biggest issue is definitely the learning curve. When you first join, it can feel confusing because there are just so many choices. But if you find the right server, I think it could actually be a really nice place for artists who want smaller communities and more meaningful interactions. For me, I would put Mastodon in A tier. Then we can dive into Newgrounds. I have to admit, I completely forgot about Newgrounds in my last video, which is kind of embarrassing because this was one of my favorite websites when I was younger. If you grew up on the internet in the 2000s or early 2010s, you probably know Newgrounds. But what I forgot is that Newgrounds was never just a gaming website, it has always been a place for all kinds of creators. You have games, music, movies, and artwork all on the same platform. You have the portal where people upload their creations, reviews, and comments, and even community tabs where people can talk to each other. It feels much more like people are there because they enjoy creating and sharing things, not because they're trying to chase some algorithm. I also completely forgot that I had an account on there when I was 12 years old, so let me tell you, logging back into that account was not a pleasant experience, but besides my questionable 12-year-old choices, I was really impressed by how alive Newgrounds still feels, because I don't think it is dead at all. It just has a very different pace compared to modern platforms. On websites like TikTok, Instagram, or X, you constantly get bombarded with new content. If you don't post constantly, you can easily disappear. Newgrounds doesn't really feel like that. It is much slower, but I think that works in its favor. People seem to spend more time looking through content instead of just endlessly scrolling. The quality of the content also feels higher because of the moderation system. Things go through review, which means you don't just have endless amounts of random low-effort posts appearing everywhere. Of course, that also means not everything gets accepted, but I think it helps keep the platform feeling curated. The community itself also feels really positive. Obviously, every website has its issues though. Some musicians have mentioned problems with copyright flags when uploading their own music, and proving that they are the original creator can apparently become a frustrating process. But compared to a lot of other platforms, Newgrounds still feels like a place where creators actually have a voice. Another thing that surprised me is how much freedom the platform gives artists. It probably has one of the most relaxed approaches to mature content compared to a lot of modern websites. Obviously, there are still rules, but it feels like there is more room for experimental or weird projects. That reminds me of what Newgrounds always was known for. Back in the day, it was kind of the edgy corner of the internet. It was the place where people uploaded strange animations, random games, and things that probably would not survive on bigger platforms today. But somehow it still became a place where people could genuinely share their work. They also have a support system where you can financially support the website. You can become a supporter or donate, and in return you get things like fewer ads, profile customization options, badges, the ability to change your username, send more private messages, and other features. The ads also don't bother me that much, and I think it is nice when people support platforms that are still keeping these kinds of communities alive. You can even vote for the best submissions of the month, and there are different ways to interact with the community beyond just posting your own work. Overall, I was actually really happy to see the Newgrounds is still around and still feels like itself. It has its own identity, its own community, and its own culture for artists who create animations, games, music, or just want a place with a strong creative community. I think Newgrounds is still one of the best options out there. For me, this is definitely S tier. A lot of it is definitely nostalgia, I won't deny that. Even looking at it now, I think Newgrounds is one of the few platforms that still feels like a real creative space instead of just another place where everyone is fighting for attention. So Pixiu is a Japanese art platform, and when I first opened it, the first thing I noticed was that it is very anime focused, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if you're looking for a place with a huge variety of different art styles, it might feel a bit limited. However, Pixiv is not just a drawing website. You can also find novels and written books on there, which I actually thought was really cool because it makes the platform feel more like a place for different types of creators, not just visual artists. One thing I really like about Pixiv is the tagging system. It is actually really easy to find specific types of artwork because everything is organized through tags. Compared to some other platforms where searching can feel completely random, Pixiu makes discovering artists and specific styles much easier. You can also filter sensitive and mature content, and the platform gives you quite a lot of options when it comes to controlling what you see. However, one of the biggest issues is AI art. Pixiu does allow AI generated content on the platform, which is obviously a big problem for many artists. They do have an option where you can hide AI generated works, which helps, but the problem is that this only works if people actually label their content correctly. And we all know that is not always the case. So even with the filter turned on, there are still concerns about AI content appearing in feeds. Pixeo also has a premium subscription called Pixeo Premium. It costs around $3.45 per month, which is honestly not that expensive compared to a lot of other subscriptions these days. And you actually get quite a lot out of it. You can browse by popularity, remove ads, access your browsing history, search by word count for novels, see reports about how your own work is performing, and access drawing lectures, and even get access to Clip Studio Paint debut. The Clip Studio Paint version is not the full program, but for that price it is still a pretty interesting bonus. You can also get a free trial, which is nice. However, it does mean that if you want the full Pixiv experience, some useful features are locked behind a subscription. For artists who enjoy anime-style artwork, I think Pixio can be a really good platform. There are a lot of talented artists on there, and because of the tagging system, it is much easier for artists to actually get discovered. But for me personally, the biggest issue is the lack of diversity. There are also some concerns around mature content. Because Pixiv is a Japanese platform, there are certain rules and restrictions around what can be shown, especially with not safe for work content. Artists usually have to properly tag content and censor certain things to follow the rules. Some artists claim that their posts are getting less visibility, almost like they are being shadow banned, especially if they do not post regularly. There has also been concerns about increasing amount of AI content flooding feeds and accounts being removed. Obviously, it is hard to know how much of this is actually happening versus people being frustrated with changes, but there does seem to be a growing feeling that Pixiv is not the same platform it used to be. It feels like it had a really strong identity as an artist-focused website, but some recent changes have made people question the future of it. For me, I would probably put Pixiv in B tier. With the recent AI situation and some of the recent community complaints, I don't think it is in the same place it used to be. Next one is Sheezy Art, and this one is actually quite an interesting case because Sheezy Art has had a pretty chaotic history. The platform originally existed back in the 2000s, but it was shut down in 2013. So when I first heard about it, my first thought was, honestly, is this platform even going to stay around? Because for artists, this is actually a really scary thing. You can spend years building your profile, uploading your artwork, making connections, and then suddenly the website disappears. However, this new version of Sheezy Art came back with the blessings of the original creator, and while it is not the same platform like it was in the 2000s, it feels like it is trying to build something new. Unfortunately, the old content from the original website is not available anymore, which is a shame, because I imagine there was a lot of history there. But looking at the current version, I was actually pleasantly surprised. The first thing I noticed is how customizable it is. You can customize your profile quite a lot, and you can even create sub-accounts or personas. I think this is especially cool for artists who would do world building or have original characters because you can separate different identities or projects. The platform also has a lot of tools that make it feel very artist focused. You can control content warnings, blur certain content, and choose which tags you want to exclude from your browsing. It also has integrations with things like Ko-fi, Patreon, Discord, and PayPal, which makes it easier for artists to connect their work with other platforms. One thing I really like is that AI art is not allowed on Sheezy Art. And after seeing so many platforms struggle with AI content, it is refreshing to see a platform actually take a clear stance on it. Of course, the important thing is whether they can keep enforcing that rule long term, but for now, it feels like a place made for human artists. The community itself also feels quite cozy. It reminds me a lot of old DeviantArt. There's a lot of different artwork, people interacting with each other, and it feels less like everyone is fighting for attention. It is not the biggest platform out there, but I think it actually works in its favor. They also have challenges, spotlights where moderators feature artists, and even live streams, which helps the platform feel more active. Another interesting thing is that they don't run ads. They have premium subscriptions where people can support the website. There are 3 different tiers: basic subscriber, pro subscriber, and VIP subscriber. The prices are around $3, $10, and $25 per month respectively, with different benefits like more personas, animated profile images, badges, more uploads per day, and extra customization options. They also have a bigger supporter option called Investor, which is $100 per month. Even the basic subscription already gives quite a lot, and it feels more like supporting the people who are maintaining the platform. The rules are also quite clear. They have examples of what is allowed and what is not, and they have different levels of nudity tags, which makes it easier to understand how content is categorized. Of course, it is not perfect. Some users still have very strong opinions about the platform, especially because of its history and previous shutdowns. And I understand why people would be cautious. A platform disappearing twice does make you wonder if it can really survive long term. But at the moment, I think Cheesy Art is in a much better place. It feels like a small but passionate community that is actually trying to create a good space for artists. For me, this is probably one of the platforms I would actually keep using after making this video. I would put Cheesy Art in S tier. Next one is Pillow Fort, and the first thing I was greeted with when trying to join Pillow Fort was actually a waiting system. You have two options: either you pay $5 for immediate registration or you join the waitlist. I decided to just join the waitlist because I wanted to see how the normal experience works. You enter your email, confirm it, and then you wait. It said that usual approval takes less than an hour, and for me it actually arrived after around 40 minutes. So the process was not really complicated. It reminds me a little bit of Toy House, where they try to control who joins the platform, but it feels much less gatekeepy. Pillow Fort is a platform that feels very inspired by old internet spaces. The closest comparison I can think of is if you combine Reddit and Tumblr together. You have communities that you can join, but instead of just having a normal feed, the whole experience revolves around finding spaces that interest you. It is not only for visual artists either. There are writers, readers, fandom communities, and all kinds of different creators using it. You can also create your own communities, so I think this could be a really good place if you want a smaller space with friends or a specific group of people. However, the biggest problem I had when starting was the same problem I had when I first joined Reddit. There are not many obvious recommendations, so finding communities that fit your interests can take some time. I think it would help a lot if Pillow Fort asked about your interests when you join and suggested some communities to start with. Then as you use the platform more, it could recommend other communities based on what you interact with. The website itself also feels a bit clunky. It works, but it definitely feels like an older website. Browsing on desktop can be a little awkward, especially when viewing larger posts, because the layout does not always feel optimized. It does not feel like a platform designed by a huge company trying to maximize engagement. There are no ads, there is no endless algorithm trying to keep you scrolling, and everything is shown in chronological order. They also do not allow AI-generated content, which is a big plus. There have been so many discussions around their not safe for work rules though. The platform allows mature content, but some users have complained that moderation around it can feel inconsistent, with people getting banned even though they believed they were following the rules. Another thing I noticed is that some people say Pillow Fort feels dead. Compared to bigger platforms, it can feel quite quiet, but I don't think it is totally dead. There are still artists posting, communities are active, and the platform has been around for almost 10 years now, which is actually impressive considering how many smaller social media platforms disappear. You can also donate to support the platform, as they rely on community funding to continue running. Overall, I think Pillow Fort is a really interesting example of an old school internet-style platform. It still needs some improvements, especially when it comes to discovering communities and making the website smoother, but I think there is potential here. For me, I would put it in B tier. VGen is a little bit different compared to other platforms I have talked about, because I wouldn't really describe it as a traditional social media platform. It feels much more like a marketplace for artists. My first impression was that it looked a little bit hectic, but at the same time it was kind of nice. One thing that stood out to me is how they handle artist accounts. To become an Artist Plus on VGen, you need a code. This is mainly to avoid bots, spam, and people overcrowding the platform. There are actually multiple ways to get one. You can have someone from the community vouch for you because each artist gets a few codes they can give out. You can also get one through monthly challenges, asking the community, or applying through places like X or Instagram. I actually think this is a pretty interesting system. It creates a little bit of barrier, but in this case, I think it makes sense because it helps keep the platform cleaner. I personally didn't get an artist code because I don't currently offer commissions and I didn't want to take a spot from someone who actually needs one. But you can still make an account as a client and browse artists. VGen actually has a really good community there. I instantly felt quite welcomed, which is not something I always feel when joining new art communities. Browsing the website was also really enjoyable. There are a lot of talented artists on there and it is very easy to find people offering commissions. You can find things like 2D and 3D models, emotes, GIFs, streamer packages, illustrations, and much more. The easiest comparison I can think of is basically Etsy, but focused mostly on digital art. Of course, it is not only for illustrators, there are also writers, graphic designers, and other types of creators. However, from what I saw, a lot of artists being showcased are focused around anime-style art and VTuber-related content. Speaking of VTubers, VGen also has something called a VSona. Basically, it is an identity or avatar that people use in the VTuber digital art and online creator spaces. You can use it to show off your identity or even offer it as something people can commission. However, I don't think it means you can just create an account and immediately get flooded with clients. There are a lot of artists competing for attention and you will probably still need to advertise yourself outside of VGen. Most experiences I found from artists were quite positive. There was some drama happening around VGen recently, but from what I saw, it was less about the platform itself, but more about disagreements between artists. The only real downside is the code system. While I understand why they do it, it can still feel really frustrating if you just want to join and start using the platform. Compared to something like Toy House, where getting access felt a bit simpler, VGen gives you multiple ways to get a code, so it is not totally impossible, just a little bit difficult. Overall, I think VGen is a really interesting platform. I wouldn't put it in the same category as places like Kara or Pixel because it is not really about sharing art and building a following. It is more about connecting artists with potential clients. For artists who want to sell commissions, especially digital art, VTuber assets, or creator-related work, I think this is one of the better platforms out there. For me, I would put it in A tier. Now, Discord isn't really an art platform, but I think it still deserves a mention because so many artists use it to share their work, get feedback, and connect with other people. I'm not the biggest Discord user, but I am part of some community servers where people share art and talk. And while it can be nice to have a smaller place where people know each other, I always feel like I'm missing out on conversations. The biggest issue for me is that Discord moves very fast. If you are not online at the same time as everyone else, especially if you're in a different time zone, you can easily miss a lot of discussions, art sharing, and random conversations happening. I'm usually only on Discord for around an hour a day, and I have most servers muted because otherwise it can get quite overwhelming. Especially when you're trying to work and suddenly you have hundreds of messages popping up. Being in multiple servers almost feels like a full-time job because you constantly need to check what is happening. And that is just as a normal member. If we're actually running a big Discord server and moderating it, I generally don't know how people manage it. Another thing I noticed is that Discord can feel a little bit gatekeepy. Not necessarily because people are trying to exclude others, but because finding good public servers can be surprisingly difficult. There are so many servers out there, but finding one that is active, welcoming, and fits what you're looking for takes time. You can search through Discord's server discovery, but sometimes it still feels like you need to already know what kind of community you want before you can find it. For art especially, I think smaller servers work much better. When a server has thousands of people, conversations can get lost very quickly and it can feel like you're just watching other people talk instead of actually participating. But in a smaller community, it is much easier to get to know people, share your work, and receive feedback. Another thing I like is that there is no algorithm. Everything is chronological and you don't have to worry about your post disappearing because the platform decides to show something else instead. You can also get feedback from real people, which is something that can be difficult to find on bigger social media platforms. And of course, Discord also has its problems. Because anyone can create a server, moderation quality depends completely on the people running it. This is especially noticeable with not safe for work communities where different servers can have completely different rules and standards. But I think Discord is one of those platforms where the experience depends entirely on finding the right community. A good server can be an amazing place for artists. You can make friends, share progress, get advice, and actually feel like you belong somewhere. A bad server can just feel like you just joined a giant chat where everyone already knows each other and you have no idea what is happening. For me, Discord would be a B tier. And last but not least, it is Reddit. Now, Reddit is a platform I have been using for years, so this one is a bit different because I already knew how it worked before trying to share my art there. Reddit is kind of similar to Pillowfort in the way that you don't just have one big feed. Instead, you join different communities, or in Reddit's case, subreddit. There is basically a subreddit for everything. If you're into a specific type of art, there is probably community for it. Reddit does recommend subreddits when you first join, which is helpful if you have no idea where to start. You can also browse popular communities, but for more niche topics, you usually have to do your own research. Personally, I have found a lot of the subreddits I use through Google searches rather than Reddit itself, because searching on Reddit can be a little frustrating. If you don't know the exact name of the subreddit, sometimes it just won't show up. Now, when it comes to sharing art, this is where I have even more problems with Reddit. I have tried posting my art on different subreddits, but it always feels like a lot of work for not much reward. Every subreddit has its own rules. Some require specific titles, some don't allow certain types of posts, some have different formatting requirements, and you constantly have to check everything before posting. Even if you follow all the rules, your post can still get removed. Every subreddit has its own moderators, and the moderation quality can vary a lot. Some moderators are great and keep the community organized, but sometimes it feels like certain moderators have too much power and can become a little too strict. Another issue is that bigger subreddits can feel impossible to get noticed in. You can spend time making a post, but if hundreds of other people are posting at the same time, your artwork can disappear almost immediately. There isn't really a good way to categorize your artwork and make sure people find it later. It is very much based on the subreddit you post and how much attention that specific post gets. Reddit also has advertisements everywhere, which can make browsing feel less enjoyable. And while Reddit has a lot of great communities, it also has some problems with negativity. Sometimes certain communities can become a bit of an echo chamber where everyone just reinforces the same opinions. I also feel like sometimes you get very questionable advice because anyone can answer anything. The moderation system also doesn't always catch everything, and there are still plenty of problematic communities that exist on the platform. Especially when it comes not safe for work content, Reddit has always had a complicated relationship with moderation. But I think Reddit's biggest strength is not actually sharing art, it is the discussions. Whenever I need real people's opinions, advice, or reviews, or experiences with something, Reddit is always one of the first places I check. The comments especially can be extremely useful because you get answers from people who have actually experienced something. I use Reddit much more for reading than posting. For research, questions, and finding specific information, it is incredibly useful. But as an artist trying to share work and build a community, I personally find it quite frustrating. For me, Reddit would be a C tier. For my own experience, it feels too complicated and too much effort for the amount of interaction you actually get. And this is all for this video. Thank you so much for all the support. Please like and subscribe for more videos, and see you next time.